Welcome to this edition of Security and Compliance Weekly. Today, we're joined by Tim Callahan, who is SVP and Global CISO for AFLAC, who is going to give us a sneak preview of his upcoming talk at InfoSec World, which is entitled From Compliance to Resiliency, the Evolution of Information Security. Anyone that puts compliance in the title of a talk that they intend to give at InfoSec, or at any InfoSec conference really, is welcome to come on this show and talk about it. So join us as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. Some things are best kept secret. You wouldn't send your company's financial data through the mail on a postcard. Then why would you let your employees use insecure collaboration and file share tools to share sensitive business information? Introducing Crossclave, a file sharing and collaboration solution built secure from the ground up. Think Signal, only designed specifically for business and enterprise users. Crossclave uses blockchain technology and end-to-end encryption to deliver a true zero-trust system designed to protect you and your business's most valuable data. So if you need to share sensitive information, SpiderOak's Crossclave is your only choice. Go to securityweekly.com/SpiderOak and get a free account with 5 gigabytes of storage.
Welcome to episode 84 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on August 24th, 2021. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, and joining me remotely, of course, are my co-hosts, Mr. Scott Lyons and Ms. Kat Valentine. Welcome. We've all recovered and survived from our week in Las Vegas, hopefully.
Yeah,
yes.
Totally looking forward to InfoSec World, and I think we have GERCON coming up next. You're going to be there, right, Jeff?
I am going to be there, yes. Are you going to be there?
I'm thinking about it really, really hard right now, especially with this Delta variant running around. I mean, it's kind of difficult to make that decision, current plans are to be there, and I think they are going to be following the norm of, obviously requiring masks. I'm not sure if I've gotten a notice. I did just get a notice, I think, where they're going to want you to bring your vaccination card. I got that for BurCon or ThogCon. I forget which one. That might have been ThogCon. Well, we had it at DEF CON, and it worked out. It actually worked out really well. So if you're going to a conference, just make sure that you have it with you.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I'm concerned that I might need to laminate my vaccine card because I might be pulling it out for the foreseeable future. Right. But then maybe I should wait till after I get the booster shot. Which I think
but if you do not have your Vax card, most states have a system where you can go and get it printed. So if you don't have it, don't worry, get the printout and keep that with you.
Well, we try to be a full-service public service podcast, and along those lines, we have a few announcements. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's in-person event. Hear from Robert Herjavec. I cannot get his name right to save my life. Herjavec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. InfoSec World is actually going to be held October 25th through 27th at Disney's Contemporary Resort, which is in Lake Buena Vista, Florida. And Security Weekly listeners can save 20% off the World Pass or main conference registration. To get this discount, go to securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 and register now. Or register after we've talked to our guest today, who's going to talk to us about InfoSec World in his presentation. Also, Security Weekly Unlocked is going to be held in person so far, December 5th through 7th at Hilton Lake Buena Vista, also in Florida. First round speakers include Leslie Carhart, Dave Kennedy, Alyssa Miller, O'Shea Bowens, Marina Chivada, Patrick Coble, Chris Eng, Eric Escobar, Nick Leghorn, Michael Schlatt, Kevin Johnson, and Justin Kohler. Go to securityweekly.com/unlocked to register and check out more information about Unlocked. All right, enough of that. Our guest today, Tim Callahan, served 23 years in the U.S. Air Force, and thank you for your service, sir. And since retiring from the military, he's worked at several banks, and he eventually found his way to AFLAC, which I believe he started in 2014. And since 2016, he's been in his current role, where he's responsible for directing AFLAC's global security strategy, leading the information security, business continuity, and disaster recovery functions across the company to prioritize security initiatives and allocate resources based on appropriate risk assessments. And in his free time, he gives conference talk. Tim, welcome to Security and Compliance Weekly.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, we appreciate your willingness to come on and give us a little bit of a teaser about your upcoming talk at InfoSec World. We, first just like to ask, I gave a little bit of your bio, but, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you ended up, in a career of InfoSec and how you got to where you are today at AFLAC.
So I'll give you the very short version of it. It could get pretty long if I'm not careful, but after serving in the military, I was in the Air Force. My core profession in the Air Force was explosive ordnance disposal. And often people say, well, how did that lead you to cybersecurity? And I did have, throughout my career in the Air Force, EOD units were very small, self-contained units. So we had a lot of, quote, additional duties when we weren't actually disarming bombs or protecting the president or doing the other missions that we did. And I was always drawn to the additional duty of information security officer, communication security, operation security, those kinds of things. And because of my profession, we had a whole lot of classified information, just vaults and vaults of it. We worked a lot with the intel community, so we had a lot of very, compartmented information as well. And so that, when I retired, that was one of the areas I felt that I would really enjoy going into, and got that opportunity beginning with SunTrust Bank. And then, so now for over 20 years, in the civilian world, I've had a cybersecurity, information security role, being a CISO at several organizations, and now winding up at AFLAC.
Well, I think I can speak for most hackers when I say you had me at you blew stuff up.
That part.
Yeah, that is. And there's a whole lot of risk correlation to cyber between explosives and the risk, probably the psychology and the methodology around risk management in that space, and one in cyber. And the most important thing, in the Air Force was always to remember that in the Air Force, our mission wasn't to disarm bombs. It was to deliver, our own target. But we played a very crucial role in protecting those assets so that they were enabled to accomplish the mission. And then, of course, being a DoD resource, not just an Air Force resource, we had a lot of different plays. And what I remember and always help my team to understand is the mission of AFLAC is to take care of our customers, to be there when they need us most. Our role as cybersecurity is to protect our customers and protect our company so that we can deliver on that promise.
Gotcha. Well, we like to ask all of our guests a qualifying question, which we call the hot seat question. And this is not a right or wrong answer type of question. It's more opinion, more give us and our audience a chance to understand a little bit where you're coming from. We're a show that's focused on security and compliance, and where the two meet and don't meet and should meet and so on and so forth. So the question, simply put, is where do you fall on this thing that we like to call the security versus compliance continuum?
Yeah, and that's a lot of my talk that I'll give at InfoSec really talks through that. But I don't see a conflict. I do see it as a continuum. I see compliance as the table stakes, so to speak. If you're in a regulated industry like we are, banking, insurance, those healthcare, those kinds of industries where you've got a lot of customer information, you've got a lot of client, very personal information, stuff that could cause damage, definitely reputational harm if you were to leak it. I think compliance is just what we have to do to stay in business. And I see it as an essential element of that, of building our trust. For a long time, I've always contended that, in the realm of risk, you've got compliance risk, you got security, or the kind of the real risk, and then you have the reputational risk. Any one of those things can be great, but if the perception is that it's not, then you definitely are damaging your reputation. So I think they complement one another. I don't think you can rely on compliance for security. I think we see across the history of companies that have been breached. Most every one of them had gone through some level of compliance check, right? Whether it's PCI, regulatory compliance, but yet they were breached. So that kind of tells us that passing a compliance check is not enough. That you have to really pay attention to the threat, quantify what that threat is, or you're more subject to criminal, nation state, all of those kinds of things, and then take appropriate action for that. So again, I don't see it as a versus, I see it as a complement.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate your thoughts on that, and I'm sure we'll dive into that more as you give us a little bit of a teaser about your talk. I did want to ask you, though, it occurred to me that we've been advertising InfoSec World for weeks now on all the Security Weekly shows, and I don't know that all of our audience has ever been to an InfoSec World. So if you don't mind, could you just give us a little bit of a glimpse as to what the InfoSec World as a conference itself is like? And I know, Scott's worked it for several years. He can certainly weigh in on this. I don't know if Kat's ever been to one or not.
Yes. But, nope, I've never been, and I'm really looking forward to the answer.
All right, so there's your audience. Convince Kat why she should not miss InfoSec World. Go.
That part.
Well, what I like to say, InfoSec World, and I've been involved with InfoSec World. At one point it was part of the NIST Training Institute, and of course the Cyber Risk Alliance purchased that. I think the flavor has stayed the same, though. And so it, in my view, it provides a good, well-rounded conference. You have technical tracks, you have leadership tracks, you have tracks dedicated to compliance and to privacy. So I think it plays well. You can look at both ends of it, and this is something MIS had instituted many years ago, is dedicated workshops on each side of that. And I've actually hosted workshops for the whole MIS organization. I remember doing the 8-hour workshop on establishing and maturing a governance process and the importance of that. So, what you have is a full plate of options, and then I like the size of it. It's large enough that you get a good cross section of companies represented, of various roles within the security organization.
Right.
But it's not so large that it's unmanageable. And some conferences just get so large that you're really challenged to take advantage of everything. So I think it's a good mix. And I'm sure Cyber Risk Alliance wants it to continue to grow. And I'm not saying we should throttle the growth, but I do like kind of the more intimacy of the conference.
So it sounds a little
good. Sounds like a choose your own adventure sort of deal.
It is.
It sounds a little bit like the intention of BSides. I happen to be wearing a BSides shirt today, just because I felt like I wanted to wear purple. No particular reason other than that. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your talk. And I was reading the abstract, the description that you wrote up for your talk, and your opening sentence thesis statement is because only maintaining compliance is not enough to protect your business from the ever-evolving threat landscape. In this session, we will consider the intersection and codependence of compliance with security, maturity, defensibility, and resiliency. I wanted to focus on that statement very briefly, and something I like to do on this show is to not make assumptions that people know that what any of us are talking about. So I would ask if you could just simply sort of unpack that sentence a little bit, and in particular, give us some sort of working definitions, or at least what you have in mind of the definitions of these terms, like, this is a loaded one, security, maturity, defensibility, and resiliency, if you would, please.
Sure. So again, I'll stick to the short version. The talk will expand on what those are with very practical examples. But, I see compliance as a program that assesses the regulatory or the statutory or the programmatic aspects and then complies with that, right? I mean, again, I know that you shouldn't use the word you're defining in the definition. I've got it, but PCI is not a law, although there's a couple of states I think has adopted, as a statutory element. But PCI is an industry set of standards that if you participate in payment cards, you are expected to comply with, right? So that's a clear, here's the standard, here's the kind of checklist, if you will, check that off and you're complied. And there's rigor behind it, depending on your, what level you're at. You have to either have a QSA come in and evaluate it or whatever. But it's compliance. If you look at regulatory compliance, things like the banking industry has the Federal Financial Industry Examination Council handbooks that tell you what to comply with. It's a scripted, I'm not saying that there's no judgment involved. There certainly is, but it's a fairly straightforward kind of thing. And then you have the concept of security. And, as I talked about before, you can't assume because you're compliant, you're secure. A security program tends to go beyond compliance in that you'll see things like a strong threat intelligence program tied to it, assessments against particular applications, data, environments. There's just a rigor about understanding what you have and being able to secure that. The NIST framework is a cybersecurity framework. You can claim that's a compliance, but the intent of the cybersecurity framework is not to be compliance, but to be a framework to have you think through processes and think through security. Then maturity is how you measure that and how you rate it. And you can have a maturity scale based on the CMM, the Carnegie Mellon Institute kind of process or the numeric process. You can have it based on the NIST 4 scales, but it's really how do you rate, how do you measure, and how do you track your maturity? And maturity is about getting buy-in from your company, from your board, from your governance structure, whatever that is. Buy-in that's saying this is the right target for our threat, our risk appetite. This is the target that we're going to set for our company. And different industries will have different targets. for various reasons. And we've gone through the whole exercise of determining what's the right target for us. We have a strategy. We definitely want to be at our peers, maybe a little bit better than our peers, but not on par with the DoD industry, for instance. You would expect, multinational global banks and defense industries to be at a higher maturity level because the threat drives that. So the maturity is all about how to measure it, how to quantify it. And then that kind of leads into defensibility. For years, I'm going to regress just a little bit. I remember when I first became involved in security at a bank, our program was a lot more around compliance because although there was a threat and we occasionally had criminal attacks, the reality is our business model really drove us to make sure that we could continue to do business. Therefore, we had to be compliant with our regulatory regimen and be able to prove that compliance. So that was the big emphasis. And I remember, it was almost a discipline in itself. An art, maybe would be better to describe it, of convincing the regulator you were compliant, right? So that was how we were incented, and that's how we kind of made our money or showed our worth to the business. And as security became more, with the threat generating, obviously that expanded that. So anyway, maturity, jumping back, maturity is measuring that. And then now, and in probably the last 5 or 6 years, maybe longer, CISOs have to start thinking a lot more defensibility. And what does that mean? And that's kind of driven, it's almost a uniquely American thing, a U.S. American thing in some respects, because of all the litigation that has come out because of security incidents. So you have to think through the lens of, my company, we have made this risk decision. How would we defend that? Because, in our society, you don't get a lot of grace once you have an incident, right? It's Everybody immediately assumes you've gone from a wonderful company to bad guy. And so every decision you make starts taking a different lens. What seemed to be a reasonable and rational decision is all of a sudden now becoming questioned. So I think, working with your risk structure in your company, I think the CISO has to think through that. Is this a defensible decision? If it's not a defensible decision, or it's one that you can't reasonably defend, then I think you put that back forward and saying, well, maybe that wasn't a good decision, and let's rethink that. Now, we've come to a state where, and a lot of this has, this wisdom has come from a book that was written by Richard A. Clarke and Robert Konecki. It's called The Fifth Domain. And in that book, Richard Clarke, Dick Clarke, I remember he spoke to our board many years ago and used what we all had kind of adopted as a phrase. There's two kinds of companies: those that have been breached and know it, and those have been breached and don't know it. And I remember that very well because the lead director of the board, the head of the audit committee, when Dick said that, asked me, to comment on that. And fortunately, I hadn't been there very long. And so I was able to answer that as not to my knowledge. I have seen no indication that we have been breached, but, I'm new here. So, but at any rate, when he and Rob wrote The Fifth Domain, they did a ton of research, and they came to the conclusion that there's a third kind of company, and that's the company that has made a priority of achieving or working towards cyber resilience. And the definition of cyber resilience is, again, the short definition is that you can withstand all sorts of incidents and be resilient, coming out the other side, handling it and coming out okay. And, so they studied a lot of companies that had significant incidents, but yet they came out okay because they had achieved this level of resiliency that they could absorb it. And you can kind of think through that in different aspects. But one of the things I use as an example is J.P. Morgan, and many of you may recall a few years back when they were breached, and they had penetration, but they contained it, right? They contained it. And I can remember the talk that Jamie Dimon came out, he was very bold in coming out and said, hey, we spend $250 million a year on security. We'll spend more. We're dedicated to this. But at some point, the criminals are at it all the time. And I'm certainly paraphrasing his speech. I don't remember all. I just remember what struck me. But they took a bold step. They were prepared. They addressed it, and quite honestly, they came out okay. You look at some of the other companies that have been breached; they didn't come out quite so okay. I mean, they wound up paying huge settlements. They, all these other kinds of things. So cyber resilience has really got to be where our company goes. And I think it's very important to say is, we're working towards achieving cyber resilience like many companies, but I still have to comply, right? I still have to take care of the security aspects. I still have to measure maturity. I still have to look at the lens of defensibility. So it's not like this is going to fix that, but cyber resilience makes the other easier. Does that all make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I usually think about maturity in this resiliency on a scale from 1 to 5, where it's like, all right, let's take just a basic example. Let's take an inventory list. You need to have a good asset list, right, to know what you're protecting. Yep. And that maturity, so maturity, a level 1 would be we do it manually in a spreadsheet. And then for 5, for me, at least how I think of it, is we automate it. Maybe there's something that pulls from AWS, GCP, Azure to populate what you have, because that's kind of what we have now, right? Is you can tear down instances, bring instances back up, and so you might need an inventory list to keep up with that. No human can keep up with that. Put that across all these different requirements and things like that, which are pretty much a good baseline for security. And if you're hitting 5 and automating a lot of things, I feel like that goes hand in hand with defensibility, right?
I think so. Yeah, I do. I think maturity definitely is an aspect of defensibility. And what you're doing in that is you're saying, as a company, we have, based on our size and complexity, we have thought through this. We have made a reasonable business judgment, and that is a defensible term, right? A reasonable business judgment that this is the risk tolerance of the organization, and we have attuned all of our controls towards that tolerance. Right. And in my view, that's defensible.
Yeah.
As being on this show, we've had a lot of really stoic people come on and be with us, and we get a chance to talk to a lot of C-level execs. And one of the questions that I absolutely love to ask anytime I get to meet a C-level exec is about business decisions. Do you see your team or your direction putting more emphasis on tools versus people and building process?
No, well, my philosophy is you don't buy a tool till you have a process. It's almost like if it doesn't work on the whiteboard, you're not ready to buy a tool, right? I believe that in the journey towards maturity or achieving your maturity targets, you have to differentiate between those different aspects of, is this okay as a manual process? is it supportable? Is it, something that you can keep up with, et cetera? Which again, as you grow in the organization, from a complexity, size, those kinds of things, that the answer becomes, less and less. I can do it manually, but you have to take every one of those decisions through the lens of, do we understand it? Do we have a process? Do we think through it? And then once you've kind of got all that, then you can go looking for your tool. I know that a lot of the security vendors, they want to come and sell you on, this is the problem, and therefore you need my tool to fix this problem. And I don't necessarily believe that. I believe that if you, as your organization, don't understand the problem, you're not ready to invest in a tool. So that's kind of my philosophy. I also think that it's very rare that you see a tremendous lift on tools replacing the need for talented people. I know, there was a time where we could say, well, we're going to automate this, therefore we don't need X. And while the workforce may be less because of automation, you still need that fundamental skill. So I'm very big on making sure you have good, strong, qualified people, that you're investing in people, that you're giving them the opportunity for ongoing education. In fact, to some degree, as you reach the higher maturity levels, you really have to have a formal training program to make sure that your folks are at that skill level. So maturity is just as much about making sure your people are trained and qualified as having, the appropriate automated process. So,
okay,
Scott, I don't know if it's what you're saying.
No, where I was really headed with that was, how are you defining that a process needs to be put in place prior to purchasing a tool? Like, what is your methodology as a C-level exec to say, this is a problem, we need a process, get a process in place, grab a tool to bolster the process?
Yeah, and it may sound very archaic, with all the modern tooling that we have, but I believe the fundamental of any program is an enterprise risk assessment, information risk assessment, whatever you want to call it. I think that's the fundamental, is where you go through the steps of understanding in a good risk assessment. You're defining your business profile. What business are we in? What direction? What's the nuance of that? You may think, well, you're an insurance company. That's obvious. Well, it's not really, because we have, sub businesses. We have a global investment arm. We have subsidiaries that are, in essence, a software company. We have a lot that goes into our enterprise risk assessment. But anyway, you do a risk assessment, so you quantify that. Part of the risk assessment after the business profile is your technology profile. What technology does the business need in order to achieve business ends? And then you start whittling that down to what are the controls necessary based on the business profile, based on the data, obviously, based on the technology. What are the processes that we need to have to cover ourselves within a defined risk tolerance? And again, I keep emphasizing that, because that is a corporate decision. That's not a Tim decision. That's a corporate decision. We go to the board and say, okay, to what tolerance do you want us to secure the environment? And obviously we have a fairly aggressive tolerance, but you put that within your risk assessment process, so that you're starting to define risk, recording on a risk register, modeling your risk to that, and saying, okay, what's our inherent risk, what's our kind of programmatic capabilities, and then what is the gap for that. And then as you pull through that process, then you start determining what's the best way to fill that gap.
So are you using RMF for it? Are you using PCI? Is it a hodgepodge? Like, what is the basis for that? And then after that question, Jeff, if you want to take us.
Well, let me, so we use the NIST cybersecurity framework. And again, that's our primary. Certainly, we've got PCI considerations that factor into that. So as you're going through your risk profile, you're listing all the things you have to comply with, right? You have to address. The framework helps you gives you direction towards that. And then, we have an independent partner come in and help us, as we defined our framework, helped us with, a maturity path that would achieve our maturity targets using the framework and what controls spell that out. And then we implemented a cyber assurance program to continuously monitor that to make sure that we're, if we've implemented a process, we've implemented a tool or whatever, that it's really achieving effectiveness. So that's the methodology we used.
Jeff?
So I've let this entire segment go with Tim being the only one mentioning PCI, and I kind of find it funny.
I win. I couldn't help it.
And Tim, that's because I've been a QSA for about 17 years. So PCI we talk about all the time on this show. I want to follow up on what you just said but we need to take a break. So we will be right back